David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, it's just extraordinary that that member can't pass this opportunity by without putting the boot into teachers. Without putting the boot into teachers. I mean, there's such an enormously long queue of people waiting to become teachers to enjoy that 14 weeks. And I'm sure that the teachers listening here will be saying, oh, goodness me, not again, this national government. They don't understand what we do and the importance of our role. One thing that was really interesting in the OECD report that came out in the past few days, it actually put us very high on the educational ladder, but behind Finland, was that the Finnish society values their teachers much, much more than we do here in New Zealand. They get paid more, they have better conditions. They have a queue of people waiting to become teachers. They choose between many more people who apply than actually get selected to be teachers. And as a result of that, needless to say, no surprise, they actually have a better performing education system than we do. We could take a leaf out of their books in order to be able to improve our education system. And I think that member over there has got it dead wrong. I just wanted to mention, as we've said, we're not supporting this piece of legislation, but it does do a number of things in terms of tidying things up. I mentioned in an earlier reading that I think there's the good, the bad, and what I describe as the ugly parts of this bill. I think the ugly parts have been removed, but there's some parts of the bill that are not so good. I do think that, as I said in the committee stages, that I believe that the secondary tertiary partnership option that's been selected is a good one. I think that provides more opportunities for, particularly as it's been trialled in South Auckland, the Pacifica Maori kids going on to tertiary education. Many of those kids may not have performed so well in a secondary environment, and this might provide a more amenable environment for them to be able to go on and take on trades, and particularly in the sort of the industry and manufacturing sort of sectors. It does, the legislation does as well make some changes for to international students and their obligations towards institutions here in New Zealand. And by notice, the Gazette set the period during which international students on the courses of more than 3 months or longer can withdraw from the course and receive a refund on their course fees. Basically what that means, Mr Speaker, is that private training establishments will be able to retain more money and to recoup more money sunk into recruiting a international student, if the student pulls out of that course much earlier than they would otherwise mean. It means that the students will face higher financial costs if they want to pull out. That amount hasn't been set since the early 1990s, and I think it's overdue for it to be done. And what it'll mean, sir, is that we'll have a lot less of the waka jumping that we've seen up to now, but it also has the other effect, possibly, that students or people who are coming into New Zealand on the pretense of joining an educational institution and then leave shortly after they get here and stay on in New Zealand, it might deter some of them from doing that. So it's a tidying up part of the legislation, but I think it's a useful and good part of it. The private schools aspect that both Mr Mallard and David Clendon just spoke about then, there's I think it was 90 years ago that this legislation was last looked at. The Law Commission has made a number of recommendations, most of them very sensible. Some of them have been taken up, others have not, and I think
no good reasons given why not.
Well, I think that's the point, Mr Mallard, is that many of the recommendations that the Law Commission made were actually pretty sensible. I do think that they could have actually tightened up a lot of the regulations around private schools, and in fact that's not going to happen. And I think our disappointment from this side is that there could have been a lot more rigorous examination of some of those recommendations and a fuller uptake of those recommendations in this legislation. Can I just also mention just our position in terms of the enrolment scheme priorities. Again, David Clendon and Trevor Mallard, a colleague, talked about this. I mean, I do think what we end up doing in this type of legislation, we're not careful, we end up rewarding privilege, continuing privilege. I mean, I would like to think that all children have equal opportunity to go to the school in their area, rather than if their dads or mothers are on a board, or their parents actually had gone to that school sometime before. I mean, I would like to think that we have a system where we are able to go to a school on the basis of merit and geography rather than on privilege. I mean, I think that's something that I believe that pretty much all New Zealanders, other than those who have gone to privileged schools, would agree to as well. On the issue of limited attendance centres, I spoke on this in the second reading. I thought this was an anomaly, and more than an anomaly. It could have ended up in, I think, something that we as members of Parliament would want very much to distance ourselves from. I think there was a lot of empty reasoning for why we could not put police checks into limited attendance centres. I could not for the life of me understand that reasoning, other than it was bureaucratic and there was always some way around it, and we've found that way around, and so we are now going to have police checks for those people who are involved in the gymnasiums and creches and around shopping centres, etc. It means that those parents that bring their children into a shopping centre, decide to leave them for a couple of hours in a creche, can have some confidence that person is not going to be a paedophile. And that was the real issue that we were facing before this amendment was agreed to, and that to me shocked me that we could not come to an agreement on that, because it was so obviously in the interests of both children and in the interests of parents that was the case. I don't think it gives 100% protection for kids. We're always going to have exceptions. It goes somewhere along the road. But I remember that in some of the submissions we looked at, that there was also recommendations, for example, that children should be able to be seen in creches and these sorts of things, so that parents could actually, it was open, that there was some sort of a mechanism by which, if that person in charge of those children had to go, for example, to the bathroom or something like that, there was some sort of means by which they would be supervised, and perhaps basic first aid treatment, which I thought was a pretty obvious feature that may have been also an obligation. We're not going to be arguing for that, but we recognise that this is a lighter hand of regulation. But I think the most important thing of making sure that those police checks are now mandatory is something that I believe is a real step forward. A number of speakers tonight have spoken on the fact that they believe that this is a piece of legislation which a lot of it is unnecessary, and if Porquin wakes up, we will recognise that. I wonder if the camera could go on to Porquin so that. I'd like the camera to go on focus on Porquin and his enthusiastic participation in this debate. Participation that I have to say, in some ways, I'm starting to miss Mr. Quinn. I'm starting to miss those random interjections, those sort of volcanic eruptions that happen from time to time, thoughtless, meaningless, but nevertheless loud. I haven't heard them for some time. Mr. Speaker, a number of people who have contributed tonight have talked about the fact that this piece of legislation is not really addressing the real issues. The real issues, Mr. Speaker, is, and I want to just acknowledge Richie Paulson from Dunedin, the Otago University, who is the head of the longitudinal study, and who was picking up the Frank Joseph Prize in Zurich this last week from 1 million Swiss francs. He's